I never thought the HOA would target my farm, but when they came after my property, they didn't know who they were dealing with. I had a plan, and it didn't involve just fighting back. It involved taking them down with the FBI. I've always been the kind of person who believed in doing things the right way. I believed in hard work, in getting my hands dirty, and in making sure my family's farm was something we could be proud of. It's the life I chose, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. But all of that changed one Tuesday afternoon. It was a normal day, like any other. I was out in the fields, checking on the crops, making sure the irrigation was running smoothly. My son, Charlie, was in the barn with his dog, feeding the chickens. My wife, Sarah, was inside getting lunch ready, humming to herself in the kitchen. Everything was calm, peaceful, perfect, quiet life on the farm. That was until I saw it. A crisp white envelope in the mailbox with the Pine Hills HOA logo stamped at the top. My stomach sank as I walked up to it. I knew exactly what it was before I even opened it. I had been hearing the rumors. I had heard the whispers. The HOA had started to come down hard on properties they deemed non-compliant, and my farm was next. I ripped the envelope open, trying to keep my composure, but my hands were shaking as I read the letter. Dear Mr. Thompson, this letter serves as a formal notice regarding your non-compliant agricultural operations. Your farming practices are deemed inappropriate for the residential zoning of Pine Hills. Immediate corrective action is required. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Non-compliant? I stared at the words. They were talking about my entire livelihood, my entire family's way of life. I had been running this farm for years, decades even, and they were going to take it from me over some zoning issue? It didn't make sense. We had no complaints from the neighbors. My farm was well kept, sustainable. We raised livestock, grew organic vegetables, and had a small orchard that produced the best apples in the county. Everything was legal. Everything was above board. I felt my blood pressure rise as I read further. You are required to cease all agricultural activities immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines of up to $500 per day, as well as the potential seizure of your property. I clenched my fists, the words blurring as I read them over and over. They were trying to steal my land. The land my ancestors had worked for generations. They thought they could just wipe it out with a pen and a couple of threats. I marched inside, my mind racing. Sarah looked up from the kitchen when I slammed the letter down on the table. What's wrong? She asked, sensing my anger immediately. They're trying to take our farm, I said through gritted teeth. The HOA is demanding that I shut down everything, or they'll fine us into oblivion and take the land. Her face paled. What? But why? They don't like the way we run things. They want to push people like us out. It's a power grab, Sarah. Sarah sat down beside me, her eyes wide with shock. But we've been here for years. We've followed every rule. We're good neighbors. I know, I said, my voice tight, but it doesn't matter. They've already decided that we're too much of a liability. I'm not going to let them take everything we've worked for. I spent the next few hours trying to figure out how to fight this. I called the HOA's office, hoping to speak with someone who could explain the situation. But when I got a hold of a woman named Claire, she couldn't give me a straight answer. Mr. Thompson, she said in a condescending tone, I suggest you comply with the regulations. If your farm is deemed non-compliant, then you'll have to shut it down. The decision has been made. I pressed her. Who made the decision? I've been running this farm for decades. No one has ever said a word about zoning issues. There was a long pause. The board has determined that the activities on your property are no longer suitable for the residential zoning of Pine Hills. You'll need to remove your livestock, crops, and any structures you've put up, or we'll begin legal action. My chest tightened. I could hear the smugness in her voice. I was dealing with more than just an HOA. They were powerful, and they were making moves to take me down. And that was when I realized just how deep this went. I couldn't just give up. This wasn't just about my farm. It was about standing up for what was right, about protecting my family and my future. I spent the next few hours looking through old records, zoning laws, and anything I could find that might help. I pulled out the original deed to the land, researched property rights in the area, and spoke to a few neighbors who had dealt with the HOA before. That's when I found something. I was sitting in the office, my eyes scanning through legal documents, when a thought crossed my mind. What if this isn't just about the land? What if there's something bigger going on here? The HOA's sudden interest in our farm, the vague and aggressive nature of their demands, and the lack of any legitimate complaints made me suspicious. This wasn't about zoning, this was about money. There was something else at play, something more insidious than a simple zoning dispute. And I wasn't going to back down until I figured out what it was. I called up a lawyer friend of mine, David, who specialized in property disputes. After explaining the situation, he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Steve, I don't know if this is just about your farm. The HOA in Pine Hills has been on the radar for some pretty shady dealings lately. I've heard rumors about land grabs and shady business partnerships. I'd be careful." My stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not the first person they've targeted, and they don't play by the rules. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something bigger going on here, something they don't want the public to know about." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The HOA wasn't just targeting me. They were targeting the entire community, using zoning laws and intimidation to push people out of their homes and properties. And they were doing it for profit. The next day, I went down to the local town hall to speak with the zoning officer. The woman behind the counter, Karen, was helpful but also wary of the HOA's influence. "I've heard the rumors," she said quietly, leaning in closer. "They've been pushing hard to get control over the land around here. And I don't think you're the only one they're targeting." I stared at her, hoping she had more information. "What do you mean?" "I can't say too much," she whispered, glancing around. "But I think there's a deal being worked out between the HOA and some developers. They want to clear out the farmland and turn it into something else. Something more profitable." That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about a few properties, it was about gentrification. The HOA wasn't looking out for the neighborhood. They were making backroom deals with developers to sell off the land for commercial use, and they didn't care who they had to run over to get what they wanted. That's when I realized something else. I couldn't fight this battle alone, not if I wanted to win. I knew I had to act quickly. The longer I waited, the more the HOA would tighten their grip on the community. I couldn't just sit back and let them take my farm. This was bigger than me. It was about fighting for the land, the history, and the future of Pine Hills. That night, I stayed up late, going over every document I had. I couldn't stop thinking about Karen's words. They want to turn this place into something more profitable. My head swirled with questions. Who were these developers? And what exactly were the HOA board members getting out of this deal? I made up my mind. I needed to gather evidence, real evidence that would expose the HOA for what they were. I started combing through every record I could find, looking for anything suspicious, anything that could tie the HOA to the developers or prove that they were using their power to push people out. I reached out to several neighbors who had dealt with the HOA in the past, but most of them were scared to talk, afraid of retribution. The few that did speak up gave me vague warnings about the HOA's power, but no concrete proof. It was clear that fear was holding the community in place, and I couldn't let that fear stop me from fighting. That's when I realized something. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a war against the people who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, using their power to control, manipulate, and intimidate. And the only way I was going to win this fight was with allies. I couldn't go to the police, they had their hands tied. It was time to bring in the big guns. The next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. I had always heard that the FBI wasn't just for big-time criminals and terrorists. They had agents who dealt with corruption, fraud, and organized crime. And what I was dealing with felt like just that, organized crime but on a local level. A local HOA with ties to shady developers, using intimidation tactics to run people out of their homes for profit. I dialed the number I found online for the local FBI office. My fingers shook as I waited for someone to pick up. "FBI, how can I help you?" The voice on the other end said. I hesitated for a moment. I think I'm dealing with something that might be bigger than I can handle. I need to speak with someone who handles corruption and fraud. The agent on the phone didn't hesitate. Can you give me more details? We need to understand what we're dealing with before we can determine if it's something we can investigate. I took a deep breath. I've got a farm in Pine Hills, and for the past few months, the Homeowners Association has been harassing me. They're threatening to take my farm. They say I'm in violation of zoning laws, but when I look deeper, I see that the HOA is in bed with developers who want to take over the land and turn it into something more profitable. There was silence on the other end, followed by a long sigh. Okay, Mr. Thompson, we'll need to meet in person. I'll set up a time with one of our investigators. In the meantime, gather any evidence you have. If the HOA is involved in anything illegal, we'll need hard proof. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The FBI was taking me seriously, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I'd have to dig deep, find everything I could, and make sure I had a solid case. The stakes were higher now, and I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The following weeks were a blur. The FBI had assigned me an agent named Rachel Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for getting things done. She made it clear that she wouldn't tolerate any mistakes, and I appreciated that. I knew this was going to be a long fight, and I needed someone who could help me navigate the complexity of what we were dealing with. Rachel and I spent hours reviewing documents, making phone calls, and meeting with key witnesses. She'd arranged for me to meet with other people who had dealt with the HOA, people who had been pushed around and bullied, but never had the courage to fight back. They all gave us pieces of the puzzle, and slowly we started to put the picture together. One thing became clear. The HOA wasn't just harassing me. They were systematically pushing out anyone who didn't fit their vision for Pine Hills. They had been targeting homeowners with larger properties, particularly those with agricultural setups or gardens, and using the threat of zoning violations as leverage to force them out. But it wasn't just about the property. The HOA had been profiting off of it. Developers had been in talks with the HOA to buy up large portions of the land, and they had been using the HOA to clear the way. The more we uncovered, the more it became obvious. This was a well-organized scheme to line their pockets and tear down the community that had been built here for decades. But the FBI wasn't the only one helping me now. I had a network of neighbors, some I had barely known before, all willing to stand up and fight. We had become a resistance. We were gathering evidence, taking photos of violations, recording meetings, and sharing anything we found. It was risky, but it was working. The more we documented, the more we realized how deep the corruption ran. It was the middle of the night when Rachel called me with some exciting news. "We've got a break," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The developer's been meeting with HOA officials. We've got the meeting logs, and it's clear they're planning to buy the land and turn it into a commercial development. They've been paying the HOA board members under the table for the last 6 months." I leaned forward, my pulse racing. "What are we going to do?" "We've got to move fast," Rachel said. "We need to build a case that shows the HOA was acting in bad faith. We'll need to catch them in the act." I knew this was it, the moment when everything could change. The FBI was on board. We had the evidence we needed, but now we needed to make the final push. I spent the next few days gathering everything we had. Emails, meeting minutes, financial documents, everything that connected the HOA to the developer. I started working with the FBI to set up a sting operation. We needed to expose the corruption in real time. It wasn't going to be easy, and there was a lot of risk involved, but I knew we had to act before the HOA could destroy everything. The day of the operation arrived. We had planned every detail. I had a team of neighbors on standby, ready to help us gather more evidence if necessary. Rachel had set up hidden cameras and recording devices in key locations around the HOA office, and we had a plan to catch the board members in the act. It was a tense few hours. I spent most of the day checking in with Rachel and the team, making sure everything was on track. Finally, the moment arrived. The board members of the HOA walked into the office, just as we had planned. Rachel and her team were in place, waiting for the right moment. As soon as the meeting began, the evidence we needed started falling into place. The board members discussed the deal with the developer in front of us, laying out their plans to sell the land and how much money they would make in the process. It was all recorded, every word, every deal. And when the meeting ended, we had them. The night before the big operation, I barely slept. My mind kept racing through all the possible outcomes. Some good, some bad, and some downright terrifying. But I knew one thing: we had come too far to back down now. It wasn't just my farm anymore. It was about justice. It was about fighting back against an organization that had been using their power to control, intimidate, and bully the people of Pine Hills. The FBI had everything in place. Surveillance equipment, hidden cameras, audio recorders, all set to capture the HOA board members as they made their move. The timing was crucial. We had to make sure the board was caught in the act of discussing the deal with the developer, and that we could prove the corruption was real. The morning of the operation, Rachel called me. "Everything's set. The board is meeting in 30 minutes. We'll have all the evidence we need. Just stay out of sight." I nodded, pacing my kitchen. "I'll be there. Keep me updated." The plan was simple but risky. I had to stay on the outskirts, keeping an eye on the HOA office, while the FBI agents monitored the meeting from a nearby van, using their surveillance equipment to record everything. We couldn't afford to miss a single moment of the conversation. If even one of the board members caught wind of what we were doing, the entire operation could blow up in our faces. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I walked down the road to the HOA office. The air was thick with tension. I passed a few neighbors on the way. People I'd spoken to in the past, people I barely knew. But today, we were all in this together. By the time I arrived at the office, the meeting had already started. I hung back, trying to blend into the surroundings, my eyes constantly darting between the office and the van parked on the side street. I had no idea how long the meeting would last, but I wasn't going anywhere until we had what we needed. Hours passed, and the waiting was excruciating. But at last, I got the call. "Mitchell!" Rachel's voice crackled over the phone. "We've got them. They're talking about the deal with the developer, and we've got the footage. It's all there. You need to come to the office now." I didn't waste a second. I moved quickly toward the building, my mind racing with the knowledge that this could be the moment we'd been working toward for weeks. Inside the office, the atmosphere was tense. The HOA board members were sitting around a large table, looking over papers and discussing the deal with the developer. I could see Judith Winters, the president of the HOA, sitting at the head of the table, her posture stiff with arrogance. Her smile faded when she saw me walk in. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice cold. I stepped forward, my heart pounding but my resolve steady. "I'm here to put an end to this, to expose everything you've been doing." Judith's eyes narrowed, and she glanced nervously at the other board members. "You can't just barge in here, Mitchell. This is a private meeting. Leave now or I'll have you removed." I didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving until you answer for what you've done to my farm. You've been selling this community out from under us. You've been using the HOA as a front for your shady deals with developers. And now you're going to pay the price." Rachel's voice came through my earpiece, calm and clear. "The video's rolling. We've got everything we need. You're good to go." I turned to Judith, who was now visibly sweating, her facade cracking. "This is over. We've got you on tape, making illegal deals with the developer, planning to take my farm and others to line your pockets. The FBI's already on their way. There's nothing you can do to stop it." The tension in the room was palpable. The other board members were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as they realized the jig was up. I watched as their faces drained of color, and Marcus, the compliance officer, stood up, his face pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," Judith stammered, her voice shaking, but it was too late. Rachel's voice came through again, this time with authority. "Judith Winters, you and your associates are under investigation for corruption, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. The FBI is already en route to take you into custody." Judith's eyes widened in disbelief as the reality of what was happening hit her. "No, this isn't happening." But it was. The truth had come out, and there was no escaping it. Her empire was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As the FBI agents moved in, the room erupted into chaos. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak up now stood tall, watching as the corrupt HOA board members were taken into custody. The air was thick with the sense of justice finally being served. In the days that followed, the community began to heal. The FBI's investigation uncovered everything. Every illegal deal, every bribe, every underhanded tactic that the HOA had used to manipulate the community and line their pockets. It wasn't just about my farm anymore. It was about the entire neighborhood. The people who had been silenced, the families who had been bullied, and the homes that had been targeted. We were all part of something bigger now, a movement that had brought us together to fight back. I spent hours talking to neighbors who were ready to take action. Felt like the floodgates had opened. People who had been too afraid to speak out now had the courage to stand up, to take back their homes, and to fight for the community they loved. The new board was elected quickly, and the HOA was reformed. It was no longer a tool for developers to exploit. It became a force for good, working in the best interests of the homeowners, not for profit. My farm was saved. The land was mine again, and I could breathe easy knowing that I wasn't going to lose it to the greedy hands of the HOA. But even more than that, the entire community had come together and stood up for what was right. We had taken on the system, and we had won. As I stood in my garden, looking over the crops that had nearly been destroyed by the HOA's efforts, I felt a deep sense of relief. The fight had been long, and there were times I wasn't sure we'd make it. But we did. I thought about everything we had been through, about the fear, the intimidation, the sleepless nights. But I also thought about the courage, the strength, and the community that had rallied together to make a difference. We had fought not just for our homes, but for the future of Pine Hills. And as I looked around at the thriving farm, the sun setting in the distance, I realized something important. Sometimes you don't know how strong you are until you're forced to fight for something that matters. And when you have the right allies, like the FBI and a community that's ready to stand with you, there's nothing that can stop you. They thought they could take my farm. They thought they could tear our community apart. But they didn't count on us fighting back. They didn't count on the FBI. And they didn't count on what happens when good people finally stand up.